Okay. You're probably thinking something right now, and that is, if you're familiar with the movie, you're probably saying, well, if you're gonna do office revenge movies, and you've clearly got Swim with Sharks here, why in the ever-living fuck is the other movie not Horrible Bosses? I knew that was your first thought of seeing this video.
Maybe not in those exact words, but yes, pretty much.
Here's the thing. There are 4 movies that kind of fall into this, and Horrible Bosses is one of them. And that video will be coming, because it was really hard to choose between what was going to go against what, because there were 4 movies, and they could have all pretty much fit with one another. And, while I was preparing for this one, I was thinking, it should really be Horrible Bosses, but this one didn't really go with the other movie as much, so, this is what we have. Both bosses end up tied up and kind of being tortured. Definitely tortured in one case, kind of tortured in the other case, so this is how they come together. Fucking deal with it.
What are you, Steve Polychronopoulos?
Yes. I'm about to do 3 in a row because somebody's leaving for a while, so...
Yeah, you guys know that.
So these are just kind of thrown together, and I'm sorry if they suck. So, nothing will be Ghostbusters Beetlejuice level. If you want that deleted like me, talk to him.
It's not going to be deleted, guys.
I'm trying.
Eventually we'll redo it.
Okay. Now that that's out of the way, let's start with Swimming with Sharks. Now, despite the fact that both of these are comedies, Swimming with Sharks is significantly darker. Like, really, really, by a shitload. Swimming with Sharks, the hysterical Swimming with Sharks, opens with a dead body being wheeled out of Kevin Spacey's house, while Frank Whaley stands by talking to the cops. So something horrible happened in this movie.
Yeah.
And we're gonna circle back around to it. And that's when we meet Frank Whaley's character, Guy, who is that... He's kind of the up-and-comer who's taking a job at this production company as Buddy Ackerman's assistant, which is a really, really sought-after job that Benicio del Toro currently holds. But when we see him here, we're going to come back around again. We're still not quite to the starting point. And he's sitting at a table with a bunch of guys, and he's basically acting like he's a hotshot. Because everybody's like, oh my god, you're Buddy Ackerman's assistant. This makes you, like, the assistant to God. And he's doing this monologue where he thinks he's hot shit, and he's telling a story about Shelley Winters, and it's a really funny monologue, especially if you're as big a movie fan as I have, and you've had these kind of conversations with people before, where he mentions Shelley Winters, and the guys are clueless. So he says, Winchester 73, Place in the Sun, A Patch of Blue, Lolita, and then he just sighs and says, The Poseidon Adventure, and everybody, oh yes, of course. And then from then on, he gets paged by Buddy, and he goes to call him. And this phone call is enough to set Guy off, because he's been going through all the torture that we haven't seen yet, and Buddy's just screaming at him from the other side, and then finally gets to the point where Buddy says, I don't think this is working out, we might have to, cut this off. So he's basically beating around the bush saying he's going to fire him, and then he's acting like it's nothing. And then he's saying, I have another call, and he can't get the other call through. And then Buddy ends up hanging up on him. So this prompts Guy to show up at Buddy's house, where he knows where the key is, which we learn how later. And he walks into Buddy's house and has Buddy's gun that he managed to get from where it was hidden in the house, and says that they're going to talk about every single insult he said and everything that happened to lead to this point, while he tortures him. Finally, we see the starting point. And Guy shows up, he accidentally parks in Michelle Forbes' parking spot. And they have their little tiff, even though we know they're going to have a love story thing going on later once she finds out just how important he is regarding where he stands with Buddy. and this is where we meet Benicio del Toro's character, who Guy is replacing. He's only in this one scene, but it's one of my favorite performances of his. He was actually telling a story in one interview where he when you watch the movie, Del Toro is playing the character like really feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if that's just the way like he is, or if that's how the character was being played or what. But he was telling a story about how, I guess the director kept telling him he either like was doing it too gay, or he wasn't doing it gay enough, or something.
One extreme or the other.
And I love that character. His name is Rex, which of course Buddy berates him for.
Yeah.
And then that's where it begins. I kind of wish this had more Rex in it, but obviously he's going to be like the vice president of Paramount or something. So that's when we learned that Guy's in a really good position, because everybody that's been Buddy's assistant has gone on to do something great, regardless of what they were put through. And this is when we get one of the first big scenes of the movie. It's probably one of the first scenes you think about if you've seen the movie before. Guy's very first task working for Buddy Ackerman is to get him coffee and Sweet and Low. And Guy comes back with coffee and Equal. And this tirade is probably one of... surely you know by now that Kevin Spacey is my favorite actor and has been for years and years. This is one of my favorite Spacey scenes. Because we just because, yeah, Buddy's been kind of built up to be this, tyrant of a character. But when he comes in, he kind of seems smooth, and people seem happy to see him, and they're chummy with him and all that. And we don't really, and he does berate Rex and say, Rex is the name of a fucking mutt, not a person. But we don't really see anything too extreme. So we think, okay, maybe Guy's thinking, okay, maybe it's been blown out of proportion, and it'll be fine. And this packet of Equal sends Buddy on such a character-assassinating tirade. His big speech about, shut up, listen, and learn, you have no brain, you have no feelings. When he even says, when he's going through the things that mean nothing, when he gets to your feelings, he actually kind of laughs to himself. But then Rex just informs us that this happens every day, and if he had, the next day he'll ask for Equal, and the best thing to do is just always grab Sweet and Low and Equal, just in case. And that's what it does. It just kind of cuts back and forth between us seeing Guy's torture and then, essentially Buddy's physical torture. Sometimes Buddy gets a little physical, throwing things at him. Even it's just like pens or paper clips or whatever, but, Guy's revenge is very, that's what the movie does so well, is in any other movie, this would seem tonally off. Like, completely and totally just off in tone. Because you have these moments that are kind of, dark cringe humor with what Guy's mistakes and how he's treated because of them. And then this physical the scenes in Buddy's apartment or house are totally and completely played seriously. Because the torture is really brutal. Sometimes he's just beating on him, sometimes he's, throwing hot sauce and salt on him from where the wounds after he punched him. There's one scene in particular that stands out where he says, now working in your office, there's one thing that's been more torturous than anything. And he goes through the house like he's looking for something. And he comes back with an envelope. And he says, the worst thing of all was the paper cuts. So he proceeds to slice Buddy's face and tongue with the edge of an envelope.
Oh, man.
And then, of course, Buddy has this obsession with his hair and it being perfect, so there's scenes where he's just cutting off really large pieces of it to where, his scalp is showing. It's really, really brutal amidst such a... it was a dark comedy from the get-go, obviously, which was the smart thing to do. It's at that point I should probably talk about the brilliance of Spacey's performance. Because what happens here is watching the way Buddy treats Guy, this movie should not be a comedy at all. But the brilliance of Spacey's performance is how he can do it so, he can make this character so despicable. But he's hilarious at the same time, to where you do feel bad for Guy, and you do realize just how, completely irrational Buddy is, and how this is not the way an office should be run whatsoever. But Spacey just has this brilliant way of doing it to where it's hilarious. There's one scene I really love where he's on his car phone, and then he's coming in, and he's screaming at Guy about something, so he's already, off the rails about something. And then he gets into an elevator, and he's in there by himself. And this poor woman walks up to the door with, these cans of film reel, and her hands are full, and she can barely stand up, and she's trying to get in the elevator, and he just screams, "Out! Who do you work for?" And she runs away, so he can have the elevator to himself.
Nice.
And then there are those moments where it gets even worse, because there are those moments where, things whenever something seems to be going well, Buddy always has a way of bringing it right back down. Because he calls him and he's saying, did you do this and did you do this? And every time Guy says, yep, that's absolutely done, Buddy's happy and, complimentary. And there's this whole long list of things that Guy did right. And then at the very end, Buddy asks for a girl's number, and Guy forgot it at the office. And that immediately sends Buddy into, you're fucking worthless, what are you good for? And just into a whole other thing. And then there are those moments where he tries to make Guy seem like they're like partners now, because he had to convince Guy to take this script that Dom once produced. It's also worth noting how much this is kind of a satire on the people in a production company and how it works all together, and how it's not at all about the movies, it's money and, power and all that. The huge name director that's really taking off that they want to direct this movie is named Foster Kane. And
Nice.
Everybody in this office is so oblivious to what a great movie is. There is not one reference made to the fact that he shares a name with Citizen Kane.
That's insane.
And then what happens here is, so he tries to get that script produced, but he ends up taking all of Guy's ideas and passing them off as his own, of course. And there are those moments where he keeps telling Guy, I'm going to put in a good word for you, and, everything's going to be great, and people are going to know your name. And the one time he puts in a good word for Guy, he's on the phone, and Guy's looking at the phone where, the green lights are beeping and stuff. And then Buddy's saying, yes, and it was all because of Guy, Guy, my assistant, who is fantastic, he's going to go on to great things, and you should really look out for him. And he's just giving him this huge, great, complimentary reference, more or less. And then Guy looks at the phone and realizes that Buddy's not talking to anybody. He's just putting on that show so Guy gets confident, and then nothing's going to become of it. But then the other brilliant thing about Spacey's performance is the fact that, as cliche as this might seem, of course we have to have the scene where we realize why Buddy is the way that he is. And it's always it's even in these scenes, it's always like Buddy is getting the best of Guy. Even in some of the torture scenes, when he puts the mirror up to his face and tells him to look at him. And then Guy throws the mirror down and walks away. And Buddy just starts laughing hysterically, telling him he's going to have 7 years of bad luck. And it's this very villainy shot of Buddy, just kind of Buddy's silhouette laughing in the dark. So even then he's getting the best of him. And then here, he's able to convince Guy that what he's doing is wrong, because the reason Buddy is the way he is because not only did he have to go through this with somebody else, Buddy's been in the exact position that Guy was, getting berated and abused like that. And now it's basically his turn to do so. He also has a story about his wife, where Guy's basically trying to taunt him, saying, your wife left you, and your wife never loved you, and because of the monster that you are. And then, of course, Buddy has the story of while she was out Christmas shopping for him, she got shot, raped, and killed on the side of the highway. Now throughout the movie, we kind of see it's at the time when we see it, it's kind of like a dastardly thing. Like it's just one of his, evil person quirks, where he has a bunch of wind-up toys that he keeps on his desk that he just watches and amuses himself with. But the box of wind-up toys is what his wife left him as a present before she left that night. So it really, and of course, with the kind of actor that Spacey is, even with, it's not just, the sob story, but the performance itself that manages to bring a humanity to Buddy Ackerman that we would have never thought we saw from what we saw of him from the rest of the movie before. So, yes. He also has a line that I really love where they're talking about, they need a really, really big director. And, he says you have to, think like, you have to get, think people big like Spielberg or Attenborough or Lean. And Guy thinks about it and says, but Lean's dead. And Buddy's response to that is, no, nobody's dead. He's just unavailable. Sadly, with the very recent passing of Richard Attenborough, it's a dated joke now, but it's still, a great comedic moment. So yeah, I think that really, really makes it work, because, like I said, this movie could have failed horribly, because mixing, dark comedy with just flat-out torture seemed kind of dangerous ground to make a consistent comedy. But they just managed to bring just the right things together. I didn't really mention this, but Frank Whaley obviously is great too, and was the perfect casting choice here. And Michelle Forbes, who you probably know from California, is also really good. So yeah, it was just it's something that really shouldn't have been as great as it was, but it definitely isn't pulled it off. It's worth noting the writer and director was also the assistant to a big producer. I don't know if this is confirmed or anything, but I've heard a couple of sources say that Scott Rudin was the inspiration for Buddy Ackerman, at least a little bit. But I guess we'll never really know. That guy, the guy that wrote and directed this, I don't know. Like, if he made another movie, I didn't see it or I haven't heard of it. So this might have been all he had, and whoever the producer that Buddy Ackerman's based off of was had him killed. It wouldn't surprise me. So it's basically, that's another thing that could have made it fail, is writing these torture scenes knowing the guy that wrote and directed it had this job before. It also could have come across as just like some sick fantasy that some guy just wanted to get out and put on a screen to vent his anger. But that's not what it feels like at all. It really, Guy is such a real character that you understand just how, even if it was really, really far, like way too far, we understand how he was able to get pushed to do what he does. So, and there's an interesting little twist about the body being wheeled out of the house isn't who we thought it was. So, I thought that's a good way to do that too. And it gives the movie this really, really kind of, it's a very interesting way to end the movie. A lot of people, I think, didn't care for the ending, but I thought it really wrapped it up nicely. And it definitely takes you by surprise, so yeah, I thought everything about it worked really well. Now, 9 to 5 obviously is like a classic. It's 1980, and it was the first time Dolly Parton actually was in a movie. And you had Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, who were really big at the time. And here we mainly follow Fonda, who is she's like Guy was on that first day at the company. She's really timid, and it's her first day, and she's only here because her husband left her, and I think we're supposed to assume she's never really had like a real job in her life before. She's just kind of been like the housewife. So she comes into this office having no idea what's going on or what to do at all. And she meets up with Lily Tomlin, who is basically training her, and she's been there for 12 years, and she's really trying hard to get a promotion that keeps getting given to men, because Dabney Coleman's character thinks, people won't, follow a woman or something like that. Something very 80s sexist. And Dolly Parton is his secretary, who is, she's basically accused of having an affair with him. She's married and he's married, and he's always like bringing her into his office and, advancing on her, but she's never actually gone through with it and doesn't plan to, but that has its own thing. Which, obviously, they kind of go through this abuse, and they all have, reasons to hate him. You have, Jane Fonda has a scene that's kind of, I suppose it's kind of somewhat reminiscent of the chocolate gag in I Love Lucy, only it's with a copy machine, and papers are going everywhere, and she has no idea what's going on, and it gets out of control. And he berates her and says this might be her first day and last day, and has no sympathy for her for this being her first day, and she was left alone in a giant copy room whatsoever. Obviously we have the Lily Tomlin story where she, really, really has been wanting this promotion, and all he throws at her is sexism, and she just has to deal with it, and she's been doing it for 12 years. For a guy, and the guy that's getting that promotion is somebody that she trained. That's how far down she is. And then she also has a moment kind of like with Guy in the script in Swimming with Sharks, where she has a whole bunch of ideas and she has really great things that are taking off, and he takes full credit for them and just waltzes off with it. And then, of course, Dolly Parton's character, who's having to put up with the fact that the whole office believes that she's banging him because he's spreading the rumor himself. And everybody was already believing it anyway. So they go out and they get stoned. And they come up with the idea where it's so great that we just left the 70s weed talk that is in this movie. You got her son with like the long hair and like the shirt that looks like a jersey that was just knit together, and he's like, "Mom, I've got a joint." That he hides in the garage. Now, and while they're here, they get this idea that they all want revenge on him, so they all have their own different fantasy. It reminded me so much of the fantasy scenes in A Christmas Story 3 years later. I can't give it, flack for being like that because it was first by 3 years, but it's like who all is it? Fonda's character has this really over-the-top fantasy where everybody in the office has like hunting dogs and they're chasing him, and then she has a hunter in his office and she's dressed like one. And they're apparently, you can see out his window, and now they're out in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
And she eventually plants him on the wall where his giant deer trophy is. Dolly Parton has one where she's like just emasculating him and like, lassos him and does all that and public humiliation and whatsoever. Lily Tomlin is a little weird. Lily Tomlin has a fantasy that she is Snow White, and she befriends the animals like Snow White did, and little animated animals come up, but it's not the animated animals that follow Snow White around, it's the animated animals from Bambi.
Mm-hmm.
And I read somewhere, in case you were wondering, their appearances were slightly altered, so as not to, be a copyright issue.
Yes.
And hers gets a little dark. Hers involves poisoning him and then pushing him out of a window. But obviously they just kind of laughed this off and they were stoned. But eventually, there was it's kind of a whole useless portion of the movie. Let me stop right here and say this right away. I'm not 9 to 5's biggest fan. Because I've only seen it a couple of times, and it was one of those times where I was like, and then I watched it again years and years later, and I still kind of felt the same way. But that's not to bring anything down. It does have its moments. There is this whole segment in the middle where Lily Tomlin is under the impression that she has accidentally poisoned his coffee after all of this talk. And there's this big long segment where they're under the impression that they've killed him. Through a series of, the whole movie has a nice feel of like, really, really classic 1940s comedies and slapstick and stuff like that. So through this series of events, she's under the impression that she accidentally put rat poison in his coffee instead of sugar. And we've seen throughout the movie that his chair is malfunctioning and doesn't, it falls back from time to time. So before he can actually drink the coffee, he manages to fall back and hit his head. So they're under the impression that he has been poisoned and is dying, so they take him to the hospital. Where he wakes up and leaves immediately, but there's another person, like, in the same room as him that has just died. So Lily Tomlin is there and just happens to see the doctor come out and a guy there saying, how is he? And she overhears the doctor just say, oh, he's dead. So she goes down to the morgue, she finds his body that's covered by a sheet, so she doesn't realize it. And she goes through this whole thing of dressing up like a doctor and taking the body out, putting it in the trunk, and they're driving, they get into a wreck, and they realize the body's not there. And this whole thing happens, and it is, a funny callback to 1940s slapstick comedy and misunderstandings and all that. But wow, that is a whole useless chunk of the movie.
I remember growing up on this movie, so I remember liking it.
Yeah, I know a lot of like the acclaim at the time just came from Dolly Parton herself. Really.
Yeah.
And she was the main attraction, despite the fact that Jane Fonda had 2 Oscars by this point. And
I was a Lily Tomlin fan too.
yeah, Lily Tomlin had Nashville a few years prior, among many other things. But if we're talking like Oscar prestige, she was nominated for it, I think. Obviously it's worth noting as far as Oscar nominations. Yeah, the song did get nominated for this, so that was probably one of those more on principle things, though. It's a popular movie. It's a Dolly Parton song. It just has Oscar nomination, not win, written all over.
You can't tell me that throughout this entire video, some of you out there aren't singing that song in your head right now, because I know I am.
Oh God, yeah, no.
Admit it.
So, but another thing you can say is, all the characters are kind of, another thing, I guess it's kind of a criticism, but it kind of fits the tone of the movie, too. All the characters are basically really over the top. They're character types, and then they take those character types and go really over the top with them. Like, we have Jane Fonda, who is like she's the timid character. It's her first day, so she plays it really, really, really timid and really nervous. You have Dolly Parton, who's obviously doing the kind of southern, desirable character, and just Dolly Parton's appearance alone is a bit over the top, just without even her like saying anything really, and then her voice is that very, just in general, her voice is that very over-the-top Southern accent. Lily Tomlin is the vengeful, hardworking, not going to take any shit character. Obviously, Dabney Coleman is like the caricature villainy boss, who, yeah, obviously, I would like to know, because obviously, we're comparing these two movies. It's kind of hard to talk about Dabney Coleman's character because, yeah, he is, like, all the adjectives that they say, like, sexist and egomaniacal, and he's a bigot, and he's hypocritical. I forget what order they're in. Lying is in there. This guy is nothing compared to Buddy Hackman, so it's really hard to kind of pinpoint it in this video, per se, but, and then we have Ross, who's, like, the busybody character who, like, watches their every move for him. But regardless of that, all the actresses make the characters really, really appealing. Like, I do love when, the way Jane Fonda's character refers to the weed as, marijuana. Dolly Parton has her nice big scene where, she has the gun that she takes to work with her now because she's so fed up with him, and she does the thing where, she has her big monologue about what she's gonna do to him, and she says, I'll turn you from a rooster to a hen in one shot. That big scene. And they do bring a lot of, and it's also worth noting that when you see the character she played before this is kind of like a really different role for Jane Fonda. This is almost weird. So it was nice that they were able to bring, enough appeal to where the fact that the characters are pretty much just types more or less isn't, too much to fault. The problem I kind of have is, when we do get to the real revenge portion, it's like the last 20... We've been building up to it the whole movie. Like, the last 20 minutes, they finally get this idea that they're going to kidnap him and tie him up. It's kind of at this point that the movie goes from reminiscent to, 40s slapstick screwball stuff to, just kind of ridiculous. They eventually put him in this suit, and he's chained to the ceiling, and he's like on a leash, and he's eventually hanging. It's I don't know. It seems like it just kind of shit the bed there in the last 25 minutes. Even though I'm not big on the movie as a whole, I don't hate it or anything, and I wouldn't even say I dislike it. I'm just not like a real big fan. It still will always have, the appealing cast and performances, and it does have a lot of memorable quotes, particularly from Lily Tomlin's character, like when she tells Roz that she got the memo and she tore right through it. I know people love that line. Obviously the from a rooster to a hen thing is like legendary as far as Dolly Parton lines go. I know just where to stick it line. A lot of lines have basically had a lot of variations in movies like this many, many years after, and still continues to. See, it was actually kind of influential in a lot of ways, while also kind of like keeping elements from past movies, but overall, as a movie and as a comedy, and pretty much every other aspect, I much prefer Cinema Sharks. And it's not just a favorite actor bias. I just think it really works in all the aspects. And even it's kind of weird that the movie where the boss gets really viciously physically tortured is a lot funnier than the movie where the boss is like hanging by the ceiling for comedic effect.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just me though. There's a lot of housewives. They came here to just have fun with 9 to 5 the rest of the
And we're not done with Kevin Spacey in September either.
And when Horrible Bosses comes back around.
Yeah.
That one, I assume that one will probably be the week the Horrible Bosses 2 opens.
That's what I'm thinking. So this is the final video for the weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed AJ's movie reviews on Friday and Ashley's new video game segment on Saturday. And, I've debated about if I'm going to continue wrestling content this week and just say forget it and just go on, but I think I'm just going to do Raw and NXT, and then we'll just leave it at that. So next week is actually my birthday. My birthday will be the brand new Versus, so yeah, that should be a fun one. And we're about to go film that one. I'm going to throw that out there. Film the next two because I'll be in Orlando in a couple of days from now. So, AJ, any parting words?
That's it.